Well, welcome to Leadership in Action. I'm Renee Meddy, Senior Partner at ORCA HR, and I'm here with Paul, our CEO. If you are new here, we show up weekly for 15 minutes to share common leadership challenges with actionable tips that you can implement right away. And so this week, we're talking about feedback that builds instead of breaks.
Yeah, so when we talk about builds it instead of breaks, we're going to talk about it in the context also of emotion intelligence, because this is sort of second part of a four-part series on emotion intelligence. So we will bring in some of the concepts around self-regulation, which is one of the second steps of, you've got self-awareness, which we talked about last week, and then we talk about self-regulation, and then we'll also talk about it in relation to ORCA's 4A's of conscious leadership, and the first part of that being awareness, and then the second part of that being kind of acknowledgement or ownership or your ability to self-regulate. So when we think about feedback, what comes to mind, Renee, for you when we think about, either self-regulation and feedback or, feedback that builds versus breaks?
Yeah, I think a lot of people that I run into, and I think I used to do this too, is when we're giving feedback, we're often telling people, or I think a big thing that happens is people that are offering feedback to someone are uncomfortable giving the feedback, because often, more often than not, the feedback is like quote unquote negative. And so the person is uncomfortable delivering it. So then they're rushing through it. They just want to get it out and don't have a whole lot of intention of the words they're using, where the other person is and meeting them where they are, where my own regulation is in the moment. Because if we're uncomfortable, what's happening beneath the surface is usually some kind of dysregulation in your system. Maybe your heart is palpitating, or you're sweaty, or you're nervous about the words and how to say something. And then when I work with clients, that often is I don't know how to say this, or how is the person going to react or respond to it? And then we get ourselves in story about what might happen, but it's not actually happening.
Yeah, I think the other piece is when somebody says to somebody, "I've got some feedback I'd like to give you." So what is their first reaction? Their first reaction is, "Oh my God, I'm in trouble." I mean, it's never feeling like it's going to be something that's positive, even though it could be. But even just that statement, "I have feedback that I need to give you," And I think also the sort of power dynamic that can come in that type of thing. So if it's a manager saying to an employee, the first thing they're going to think is, well, it's going to be something either negative, right? Yeah. As opposed to positive, Yeah. And so, but I think what you say, I think one of the biggest challenges is if you have to give feedback yourself to somebody, you have to be in an emotional state to be able to give that feedback.
Yes.
And as you say, if you're either worried, feared, triggered, or whatever, it's very challenging.
Yeah. And a lot of times people don't stop long enough or pause long enough to understand where they are or how they're feeling in that moment.
Right. Yeah, I know we give a class around feedback, and we give some models of how you can give feedback, So one of the models is a very simple one, is just what, so what, now what, right? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of, well, it's what I observed. So, here's what I observed, Renee. And, here's what I think the impact of that might have been. And then here, if that continues here, and then you get the person involved in that type of discussion. But just even having a very small model, like what, so what, now what, can just help a person just have that conversation in a very different way. Usually when people are giving feedback, they're feeling sort of very flustered. They're either usually not very clear, or they do what's called the feedback sandwich.
Oh, the worst.
Hi, Renee, you're doing a really good job, but I'd like to give you some feedback on this. And keep doing that good job you're doing.
Yeah.
So in the middle of it, I'll give you the negative piece,
Yeah. Well,
and
and I
you'll
think
walk away feeling confused.
one of the other things that we probably do naturally, and maybe is not even labeled as a model or something, and you can do it within the so what, now what, is come from a coaching perspective. So again, instead of telling,
Yeah.
is asking the question, have them engaged in the feedback. Like I'm probably not the typical feedback, like when I receive feedback, because I I know what I do well. Like, and I think a lot of people know what they do well. They might not totally believe what they do well, but there's a sense of knowing what you do well. I want to know the kind of the constructive criticism of like, what can I improve on? So if you understand who's reporting to you or the person that you're giving feedback to, and you know them as like a human and what are their tendencies, what do they like, what do they not like, I think that's also an important conversation to have early on, is how do you like feedback? Because some people might want it written ahead of time so they can digest it and reflect on it. But if you take a coaching approach in the moment, if you say a person doesn't want it written ahead of time, ask the question, like, what do you think went well about this? What could you have done better? And that primes the brain, from the neuroscience side, to open it to be more receptive than, like you said in the beginning, so I have some feedback for you, or like, the worst is sending someone a message, can we talk? It's like, it just like leaves it out there, like we automatically go to like, something's wrong, what happened, what did I do wrong?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's that sort of uncomfortable feeling that sort of two humans getting together. One is making up stories about what the other person is going to be thinking.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And which sometimes just even finds it very difficult for them to engage. So I think the first thing is the individual who's giving the feedback has to be in that state where they're ready to be able to give feedback.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the person who's receiving the feedback also has to be in a particular state.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like, if you have a situation where something occurs and somebody like blows up or something like that, it's very difficult for that individual even to listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I remember a situation where somebody like literally, blew up and started throwing things around a room and stuff like that, and which was very, very, very unusual. But the manager then was trying to give the individual feedback at that time. Well,
at that moment,
and so he would have been better saying, look, let's take some time for you to calm down and let's chat about it then.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
and that's all, activating, we talk about priming the brain. But then allowing your amygdala hijack to chill out before you can receive anything.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So like a couple of things, like one of the things just in terms of just a learning for people is just notice your own internal response. So this goes back to kind of the awareness of when you're either giving or receiving feedback.
Yeah.
So like if I'm giving feedback, what's my internal response? And then if I'm receiving feedback, what's my internal response? And I think, as you say, if you take a coaching approach, one I think the big advantages of a coaching approach is when you ask people questions and you get them to engage in it, they're more likely, because they're engaged, to take more ownership.
Yeah. Because
if you just tell somebody, then they don't have to take that ownership.
Yeah. And then they automatically get defensive, more as like a human behavior reaction to someone telling you something. So asking the question shifts the part of the brain that's opening and receiving.
So how, like, you've done a lot of work in self-regulation and that.
Mm-hmm.
So how, like, if you're a leader or a manager and you have to give feedback, how do you actually prepare yourself for that?
This goes back to my mindfulness days too. There's the in the moment, but then there's the preparation. So very similar to exercise. If you're going to go in and lift 50 pounds and you haven't prepared prior, and that makes it a harder lift. But if you can practice when you're in a regulated state, when you get activated, you have access to that regulation a lot easier. And so it can be a variety of things, but it comes down to nervous system regulation, regulating the nervous system, which is why you will often hear someone say, just breathe. Because what breathing does is activate the rest and digest side of the nervous system. But if you don't have a regular breathwork practice or meditation practice or mindfulness practice, that if you have one of those, that will help you recognize in the moment what you're feeling and where you're feeling it in terms of the body system sensations. But one of the tools would be, they say, name it to tame it. So if you find yourself dysregulated, anxious, heart palpitations, nervous about giving feedback, then name that you're nervous, anxious, whatever it is, because it gives it a little bit of distance from the reaction. And then with practice, that distance gets further and further apart. And then it also, you can have those conversations with whoever you're giving feedback to. Like, this isn't very easy for me. Like I used to say, I don't mean this in the way it maybe might come off, depending on who's receiving it, but I like to just get it out there and then create the space to talk about it. So instead of trying to fluff it with the sandwich method, like we were talking about, like, I'm just going to say what the thing is, and then we can talk about it. And so over time, you start finessing and, getting a little more skillful in that. But I think one of the in the moment thing is like, name that you're nervous about it. Practice ahead of time, like what the words are. Being vulnerable as a leader, like there's definitely a line, but I think you can say like, I wrote this down ahead of time so that my nerves don't, get in the way, and then read it, So there's those practices, the ones that you do before you get into a moment that's going to be activating for you. And then there's some in the moment practicality. But, find something that helps calm your nervous system and regulate it. For some people it's knitting, for some people it's exercising, walking, breathing. Find your thing. There are many doorways to access that.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, you kind of have to practice this, but not in high stakes environment, So like giving even positive feedback, you can practice it, right? And you can sort of say, here's where I noticed, and this was the impact that I think it had on the team or something like that. And, and I'd love if you continue to contribute like that. That's giving feedback. And that's using the what, so what, now what, again, but you're using it in a very positive thing. But if you can start just practicing in a very positive way, when you get into these others, it's not going, you've got, at least you're building some muscle around having those conversations, That
you make a good point too, that made me think about creating the culture of feedback. Because sometimes it's like no news is good news.
That's right.
And then there's bad news.
That's right. Well, yeah. So therefore, if I say I've got feedback for you, the only thing I know is negative.
So yeah, balancing, and there's the research. I don't lean too heavily on research, but the research around it takes like 7 or 11 positive things to override one negative thing.
Negative.
If you're not giving consistent feedback or little pieces of feedback, like feedback doesn't have to be a big sit down.
That's
it can be in passing.
In the moment, and it can be very timely, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's
and I think there's also, there's in the hallway feedback, and then there's kind of more private feedback, and then there's that instant feedback, which can happen at any time. So I think also thinking about those things. So I think we've only got 1 minute left. So if we, I think one of the things is the recommendations I would give to people is use a simple model like the what, so what, now what. Practice giving positive feedback. Here's what I observed. This is the impact that it had on me and the team. here's what I'd encourage you to do going forward. And you can actually use that. Or as you say, you can say, hey, rather than even saying that, you can say, what do you think happened when you spoke out at the meeting? And so you get them to think about it.
Yeah.
You know?
What did you observe?
And what did you observe? Right. And then that can also, and that also then gives people a very sort of, oh my God, you noticed that. And now I feel good about that. So I'm actually going to probably repeat some of those behaviors. So it's kind of like, observe not just the bad behaviors, but reinforce the good behaviors, or the things that you want to see more of, And so anyway, I think we're almost out of time, but
we're at time, but I want to share one thing and circle us back. I think what's really important is every time a new person comes to your team or every time you're new is have that conversation with people. This is how I like to receive and give feedback. How do you like to receive feedback? So you start meeting people where they are. I
think that's great because different people, some people need a lot more detail, more direct. As you say, some people might want it in writing and time to think about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really powerful piece of advice. So until next week, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Next week, we're talking about self-regulation under pressure. So join us next Thursday.